we? CCLA difference what? Difference makers, greatness clap. Hey, greatness clap. You're the difference makers and it don't stop.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is our last session today. And I hope you've had a wonderful conference experience already. CCLA and the summit, they put on an amazing set of experiences. So more in store for tomorrow as well. I wanted to note that the PowerPoint for this session, as well as all of the sessions that I've done today and all of the sessions that Doug has done today, are posted on our website. And so I've got the URL that is there. When you do not need the PowerPoint right now, it is an actual PowerPoint, not just a PDF, so that you can utilize this in a number of different ways. We know when you come to the CCLA Summit that you're wearing multiple hats. You're not only here for your own enrichment, but you're always thinking about the colleagues that you support, the schools that you support, the students that you support as well. And this is such a wonderful grounding for being able to have those exchanges of ideas. Hopefully I have stalled long enough that you have maybe taken a picture of that. I'll put that back up again as well. The title of this session is Trajectory Changing Schools Do a Few Things Well. I hope that one of the words that resonates for you is few. They do a few things well. Sometimes when we think about school improvement, it can be such a huge task to be able to take on. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what are things that contribute to student learning at the school level, not only at the individual student level, but how it is that we can lift up entire schools in being able to do so. I also want to give a shout out and a special welcome for those of you that are joining online as well. We do have online participants. So when you talk, I'm going to come run over with a microphone so that the people that are online can hear you. You can be heard here in the room, but they can't necessarily hear you as well. If you've hung around with Doug and I for long enough, you are familiar with the idea of learning intentions and success criteria. We're deepening our understanding of how to lead trajectory changing schools. And important to say this as well, leaders are people like you. A leader is not a title. A leader is how it is that you lead with words and with actions. The adults that you support, the adults that you work alongside of, the students that you support make you leaders. And we'll start with a little note-taking tool. You have, for those of you that are here in the room, you have blank paper that is on your table. It's a pretty simple fold to be able to do. This, by the way, is one of the signature practices that we have at the school where Doug and I work as well. Every student, every teacher knows how to do this, and they use it on a regular basis. This is called a discussion roundtable. Here's what you're going to do. First, you're going to fold it hamburger style. And we're going to add another hamburger so that you can already imagine you have 4 quadrants that are in there. You have one corner that has no loose ends. Imagine that it is the center of your paper. Fold that down into a triangle. And when you open it up, you'll have creases that look something like this. I went ahead and put magic marker over it so that you can see it. It's got a rhombus that's in the center. We're going to talk about 5 ideas in this session. And the 5 ideas are listed up here. I invite you to make your notes in each of those quadrants. The first one, 4 resources. The second one, belonging. The third one, consistency. The fourth one, coherence. And then in the center, your first action. What is it that you want to be able to accomplish? As you're putting those together, I'll talk about some ways that we use it at school. Sometimes it is an organizer around 4 ideas that we want to make sure hold together. And then in the center, we invite students to be able to write what the connection is, how all of these 4 things work together. It could just as easily say solid, liquid, gas, plasma. And in the center, how do those 4 things hang together? At other times, we use them as a discussion roundtable. So, for example, for students that are at a table, they're reading and discussing a common piece of text. They label each quadrant by the names of the people that are in their group. My name, the person's name, always goes in the top left-hand quadrant where they write their notes about the reading. And then they talk about each of them in turn about what it was that they noted, pardon me, in the reading. And they take notes based on, for example, what Abigail had to say. I write that down. And what Matt had to say, and I write that down. And then in the center, they write their own independent summary of the discussion, and they turn that whole sheet in. And as a teacher, I'm interested in looking at how their thinking evolved from when they initially read it on their own, which I can see from their notes that they wrote in the top left quadrant, and how the sophistication of the thinking evolved by the time they got to the center and the rhombus after they had had that conversation. So hopefully you have that all put together now. I did a little bit of a stall there so that you could get that together. So I'm going to talk about 2 important reports that have come out in the last couple of years and link those up and sync those up to the work that we all do as caring educators. The first report that I'm going to talk about is called The Opportunity Myth. And this came out in 2018. So it's several years old at this point. It is available for free online. All you have to do is search Opportunity Myth and you will get the entire report. It was developed by TNTP, who long ago used to be known as the New Teacher Project. They have since evolved beyond supporting new teachers. They do lots of stuff now. TNTP is the one who put this together. And what they looked at were what the quality of students' academic experiences were in order to be able to understand what school looks like for lots of kids. And among the findings that they had, and they spent lots of time in 12 different school districts for extended amounts of times, including classroom observations, interviews with teachers, interviews with administrators, interviewers with students. And what they found, and this is one part of their report, was that students largely met the goals that their teachers set out for them, as evidenced by things like the grades that they got in class. And they estimated that about 88% of the time, students were working on activities that were related to the class, that 71% of the time, students met the expectations of the assignments that were given to them, that 83% of students earned A's, B's, or C's, in other words, passing grades in English language arts, and 78% of them similarly earned passing grades in mathematics. So far, so good. But what they also found out was that what it was that students were being asked to do in class did not link up to what the grade level expectations were. In other words, kids were doing what they were being asked to do, But what they were being asked to do was rarely at grade level. And in fact, only 17% of the assignments overall over the course of an entire school year were aligned with grade level expectations. So even though they were doing what they were being asked to do, even though they were getting passing grades, they rarely were engaged with actual grade level work. Where do we see this showing its head? When we get the CASP results back. And sometimes as educators, we say like, well, kids don't know how to do that. It's what the grade level expectations are. Have they had opportunities to be able to do that? They estimated in their findings that of the 720 hours of instruction that students receive, that fully 530 of those hours is dedicated to below grade level work. It's kind of uncomfortable. Here's what it looks like. There's another way of being able to look at what it looks like. Now we're gonna put this under 4 resources, just to give you a heads up on your note-taking device. So we're gonna talk a little bit about 4 resources, and then I'm gonna turn this over to you for conversation about this. They also looked at what the key resources were that help kids to be able to access grade level instruction. And what they found in particular was that when there were better assignments, kids performed at a level that was 1.7 months ahead of similar peers in other schools. That when there was stronger instruction, actually not as much of an impact, a couple weeks worth of impact compared to similar peers. When looking at engagement, students had higher levels of engagement. And the big one, when teachers had higher expectations, students performed 4.6 months, almost a half a year, ahead of similar aged peers. Pretty impressive kinds of results. But now let's extend that just a little bit further. If you want to write down those 4 resources, by the way, go right ahead and do that, because I'm going to show you some more statistics related to that in just a minute. Now let's look at their data from a slightly different perspective, because they also ran the numbers for students who started out the year below grade level. Same 4 resources, but now look at what the impact was for those students. Better assignments made a huge impact on kids that were below grade level. Stronger instruction made a huge impact on students who were below grade level. Engagement was not affected as much. Teachers having high expectations, a huge impact on students below grade level. In other words, these are our canaries in the coal mine. These are the kids who are going to respond in negative ways or in positive ways when conditions are either unfavorable, or are favorable. They are the canaries in the coal mine. It matters tremendously what the quality of assignments are, what the quality of instruction is, and what teachers' expectations are for those students. A huge impact that happens. So if you want to write down any of those numbers, go right ahead because the next slide is an extended conversation with your team. And so, okay, so let's do some reflection and some connection. In the next minute or so, some quiet reflection, maybe making some notes to yourself. Looking across your campus, where are students getting the full mix of resources? Those 4 resources are around assignments, instruction, engagement, and expectations, and where are they not? And which classrooms consistently offer all four of those resources? A minute to reflect and then make some connections with one another. If you're sitting with people that you don't know, say hi, introduce yourself, and what surprises you, what confirms for you around all that. So silent reflection and then conversation, what surprises and what confirms. When you're ready, go ahead and start your conversation. For those of you that are online, please drop ideas, thoughts, observations into the chat. and I'd like to welcome you back. Now, I promise I'm not letting you hang with the sad news. All right. Opportunity myth kind of takes the air out of our tires, right? To be sure. So I want to talk about some of their more recent work. And their more recent work, which was published in fall of 2024, is called The Opportunity Makers. So if on the one hand, we have a gap. By the way, I just want to say it's really hard to get good at stuff you haven't been taught. Okay? It's really hard to get good at stuff they haven't been taught. Opportunity makers, where is this working? Where are the schools that are on fire? And what can we learn from them? This appreciative inquiry is I think, an amazing way to be able to progress for that. Again, this is free, downloadable. It's about a 60-page report, which I will attempt to summarize a bit smaller than that. So I'm going to talk about their methodology. There are 51,000 public schools, charter schools in the United States that are K-8 or some version of that. K-5, pre-K-5, K-6, 6-8, all of those, right? There are 51,000 of them. And they are, that Stanford has this huge database of test scores, state test scores, typically administered from grades 3 to 8. So that's where they're drawing their data from, their initial data from. Of those 51,000 schools across the United States, 28,000 of them, I skipped a slide. 28,000 of them have students at the grade level average who on their initial year of testing, third grade, are below grade level in reading and mathematics. All right, so kind of hang with that. Maybe that sounds like your school, maybe it doesn't sound like your school. 28,000 of these 51,000 schools have students that were at the third grade level who are below grade level according to state test scores in reading and mathematics. Big chunk of schools that are there, to be sure. More than 50%, exactly. So they dug down around those 28,000 schools and they said, where are there schools among that large subset? Where are schools that have a trajectory changing impact on what it is that students are achieving as measured by state test scores? And they identified 1,345 schools that had at least 1.3 years worth of growth for every year in school for at least 3 years in a row. 1,345 schools. And they called them schools that have sustained a long arc of improvement. I think all of us at one time or another have had a grade level where it's like, I don't know what was in the water that year, but those fourth graders, they did an amazing job. These are schools that have sustained this for at least 3 years in order to do so. As I said, about 5% of them met that criteria. At least 1.3 years worth of growth. At the highest level, some schools got 1.7 years worth of growth for every year in school. So don't you want to know what it is that they did, right? And just kind of hang out with what that means in terms of the impact on a child. That means that at the third grade level, he or she was below grade level. And by sixth grade, they were at grade level. That changes the lives of students. in order to do so. Here's another way of being able to look at it. Trajectory changing schools up there on the yellow band. Schools with average learning rates down on the gray band on the bottom. They started out at about the same level. But as the years progressed, the students in the trajectory changing schools were slightly above grade level. The students with average learning rates started out 1.1 years behind, and they finished up 1.1 years behind. In other words, nothing changed. It was just a steady rate, but it wasn't an accelerated rate. An acceleration for so many of our students is exactly what it is that we have to accomplish. So then what TNTP did is they said, we need to do a deep dive into what's going on in these schools so that we can figure out what the secret sauce is and we can replicate what that looks like. They chose 7 schools across the United States who represented different demographics, different levels of urbanicity, including rural schools, suburban schools, and urban schools, different configurations and different regions in the country. But all of these schools were marked by poverty rates as well as diverse student bodies as well. They did a deep dive on these 7 schools and conducted, as an example, in each of these schools, about 600 classroom observations in each school. And I'm thinking about, for those of you that get taken to the best class in the school, and we all know, for all of us, we know who the 5 or 6 best classes are in the school. Imagine a school where there are 600 classroom observations that are done. You don't get to hide the classrooms that you don't want to see. They interviewed students, they interviewed families, they interviewed teachers, they interviewed administrators. They spent weeks and weeks and weeks on campus at each of these 7 schools. And here's the secret sauce. Are you ready? Are you ready? Belonging, consistency, coherence. Trajectory changing schools do a few things well. They don't try to take on every single thing that there is to do, but they maintain an investment around these 3 ideas. During the remainder of our time together, we're going to spend time digging down a bit more deeply into what it is that we mean by belonging, what it is that we mean by consistency, and what it is that we mean by coherence, as ways of being able to frame what it is that you want to see happen at your school site next. And don't ever, ever use the word just to explain yourself. I'm just a 4th grade teacher. No, you're not. You're a teacher leader. I'm just an assistant principal. No, you're not. You're a leader. Make sure to understand what our own power and effort is in doing so. What they found in particular was that these 3 things reinforce one another. They are not separate from one another. A sense of belonging among students, among staff, and among families has a direct impact on the consistency of instruction, intervention, professional development that happens in the school, has a direct impact on the coherence of the intervention efforts, the professional learning efforts, and so on. They inform and they magnify one another. And we're going to take a look at a principal in New York City in the Bronx. I've had opportunity to spend lots of time at her school with her. And what I'd like for you to look for and listen for is evidence of investment in belonging, investment in consistency, and investment in coherence as you hear Alexis talk about the school.
And our children were starting to feel really proud and confident. They were on board. Today, we infuse literacy at all costs, at all times, in all content areas. So you'll see literacy in art.
What would it feel like to be on the street in this collage? Provide evidence from the work to support.
In math, you will see children engaging in the 3-read protocol.
The gist of the story was each round they get a certain amount of points.
And they'll use the problem-solving procedure to annotate text.
So, do we agree with her so far?
Another great practice that is implemented school-wide are the participation cards.
Remember to use your participation cards to agree or disagree with Owen.
These practices that are consistent staples are what allows us to create success. Regardless of what grade the child is in and how they progress throughout the school, the child still has the same consistency. When the situations are predictable, the children feel a lot safer, and so do the teachers. We have a motto that we're a community of one, and no doors are closed, no one is an island here. And we're sharing best practices because we want to be the best we can be for our children.
to be able to expand and improve. Alexis is still there as a principal. Those same things that were put in place that she talked about in 2019 are still there today. Here are her latest metrics. This is from June of 2025. So I'll turn this conversation back to you. What did you see that she was doing, talking about, and so on, as it related to belonging, as it related to consistency, as it related to coherence of effort? What were examples that you heard or saw? Please take about 20 seconds to finish your thoughts. And I'd like to welcome you back. So let's talk about belonging. You don't get family satisfaction scores when families don't feel like they belong at the school. There's a continual investment in the community in making sure that families are involved in their children's education. By the way, that doesn't mean that the staff lounge is filled with families who are cutting things out to be able to hang on to bulletin boards, right? This is, as she noted, the poorest congressional district in the United States. It is a largely immigrant population. One of the major groups that they serve are students from the Dominican Republic in particular. But you don't generate those kinds of family satisfaction scores if you don't feel like you belong in your kid's school, even with language differences that are happening. Doug was there earlier last year after they got the test results, and in the afternoon, they had a staff meeting. You know what they talked about? The 2% of the kids on the math proficiency assessment that didn't make it. and looking closely what's happening, who's benefiting and who's not benefiting from the instruction that we're doing. That idea of continuous improvement, a consistency around all of that. And coherence in terms of making sure, and she noted literacy at all times, at all costs, in all subject areas as an area of investment for them. Trajectory changing schools do a few things well and continually reinvest in that as well. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these elements, because these are elements that are within your sphere of influence. And the first one is around belonging. Belonging being not just a bunch of activities that are done during the first week of school, but that have a continual investment in them. And I think that staff in particular are really useful for being able to gauge belonging. So often we think about belonging as being something that is at the student level. We're going to pay attention to how it is that students feel a sense of belonging. And of course, that is important. But if we are not invested in monitoring how it is that staff feel a sense of belonging, how on earth are they going to make young people feel a sense of belonging? Because you can't pour from an empty cup. If you don't feel like you belong, what are the chances that your students are going to feel a strong sense of belonging? There is a difference between feeling like you belong and feeling like you fit in. So we've been, for the last couple of months, kind of collecting information responses from educators about how they see differences between belonging and fitting in. And so here are some examples of some of the things that educators have said to us. Another way, I guess, of putting it is that belonging is authentic acceptance and fitting in is conditional acceptance. I always think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember when you took your early psychology classes in college and you had that hierarchy of need and physiological needs right there at the very foundation. But here's something that I think we get mixed up in education, because in Maslow's hierarchy of need, a sense of belonging comes before achievement. And too often in school, your sense of belonging comes after you've shown us you can achieve. We've got that backwards. Belonging precedes achievement. Belonging really is the foundation of everything it is that we do. And we have to pay close attention to how belonging leads to engagement among adults as well. We, 2 years ago, we talked to new staff members and some veteran staff members at the school where Doug and I are. And we asked them questions about belonging and how they knew that they had a sense of belonging. We didn't front load what that conversation was going to be, but here are some things that they had to say. So I'll turn that conversation over to you. You heard them talk about a couple of different things. As adults, feeling involved, feeling needed, feeling supported, feeling heard. What are ways at your school site that some of those conditions exist? What might be some things at your school site that could be strengthened so that people feel involved, they feel needed, they feel heard, they feel supported? So I'll turn this conversation back to you, and maybe that's an action that you might want to add to your notes. And I'd like to welcome you back. Welcome back to all of you. Building a sense of belonging among staff is a really important part of that. For those of you that think about onboarding and onboarding of teachers who are new to the profession, or onboarding of teachers who are new to your school site, think closely and think carefully about how do we make sure that those adults feel involved, feel needed, feel supported, and feel heard early in their career or early in their time together at the school. We have such opportunities to be able to really build on that sense of belongingness among our staff, because when we build a sense of belonging among staff, students benefit and families benefit from those efforts as well. Let's talk about that second condition around consistency and what it is that they found in terms of consistency at these trajectory changing schools. One of the things that they found, not surprisingly, was that grade level instruction happened regularly in these classrooms, that the content was consistent. There's been lots of attention and effort around high quality instructional materials. And in California, we have access to lots of high quality instructional materials. What doesn't always happen is fidelity to those high quality instructional materials. In fact, I just read, and take it for what it's worth, the state of Texas recently issued a cease and desist order against Teachers Pay Teachers because they said it is undermining our ability to be able to ensure consistency and investment with high quality instructional materials. The Rand Corporation a couple of years ago did a different study looking at high quality instructional materials and found that 75% of teachers either skipped or supplemented or replaced at a significant level things that were in the curriculum already because they weren't always sure that their students could do it. And I will offer this as well. Your instructional materials are one tool that you have. They're not the only tool that is in your toolkit, but they are one important tool that's in your toolkit. And being able to link up what that consistent content is with consistent collaboration among adults. You're not by yourself in being able to do this. If you're struggling with being able to implement these kinds of practices, for example, you shouldn't be left alone to be able to do that. You've got to have consistent collaboration among professionals to be able to solve these problems. Professional learning communities have the potential to be able to do so. Unfortunately, professional learning communities are not always implemented in the way that they were meant to be designed. Some of you remember when we were kids and we would sit in a circle and we'd play the whisper game, where somebody had some message and they would whisper in the person's ear sitting next to them. And we'd go all the way around the circle. And by the time the message came back to the originator, it was completely different than what they had originally said. Professional learning communities can be like that as well, because we don't spend time in teacher school teaching teachers how to collaborate with one another. We are a highly social profession. Believe it or not, we have higher than average social skills. You are not allowed to name the person on your staff who has lower than average social skills. As a profession, we have higher than average social skills. And what that can do is mask the fact that getting along with each other is not the same as being able to work with each other and collaborate with one another. And what happens in some professional learning communities, and again, backed up with some good solid research on this, is that when teams don't know how to disagree with one another, they fall back on, well, she's my friend, and we get along well with each other, and she just offered an idea that's kind of stupid, but I don't want to say that it's kind of stupid because I don't know how to say it without hurting her feelings. Sorry about that. I made you the bad guy for that as well. Adults need to know how to work with one another. It isn't only consistent collaboration time. Hey, every Wednesday we have late start so that teachers can work together. But what's going on in those collaborations? How are we making sure that teachers aren't left alone on an island to be able to figure out everything on their own? And consistent reinforcement that instructional leaders are not trying to serve everything on a platter. Hey, I went to a conference last week and I heard this great idea, and so now we're going to start it on Monday, right? But that are consistent in terms of keeping a focus on the things that matter the most. Belonging, making sure there's consistency in instruction and in collaboration. And then that third piece around coherence, always looking for coherence. That consistent content includes adopted curriculum with consistent use, and that it's high quality curriculum as well. What they did, I referenced earlier that they did about 600 classroom observations at each of these 7 schools. And they had an observation rubric that they used, and they noted that 9 out of 10 classrooms, multiplying all these out, 9 out of 10 classrooms scored at either the strong or either at the good or strong levels. In other words, consistency from classroom to classroom to classroom. What they noted was in comparing that to that earlier opportunity myth report that I talked about, that's over there on the right-hand side, a big difference in terms of the average quality of the lesson in those trajectory changing schools on the left versus those opportunity myth schools on the right. And as I noted earlier, consistent collaboration among the adults around professional learning communities with a focus on instruction, keeping the questions simple. Here's a not simple question. Our reading scores were really bad last year, so we need to make the reading scores go up. That is a bad question, and that is not a simple question. Drilling down into what it is that we want to be able to strengthen, what it is that we want to be able to improve, investing in a sense of inquiry and processes that help to facilitate inquiry, and teams having opportunities to be able to look closely at their impact are really important. We write about PLC Plus model, and at the school where Doug and I are, teams come up with a common challenge either once a quarter or in some cases once a semester. We have common challenges which are simply statements about what the current common challenge is, and teachers decide which professional learning community team they're going to participate in at the quarter level. So we're reconstituting our professional learning communities either quarterly or in some cases at the semester break. You are not stuck with the same group of people because you're in second grade and the only arrangement is second grade teams. And so you're stuck with all these other second grade teachers until you leave or somebody else leaves. So they get to vote with their feet about what it is that they are interested in, what they want to be able to investigate. That's the L part of a professional learning community. It's supposed to be time for adults to be able to learn as well. And then concrete actions to do so. We believe that every student deserves a great teacher, not by chance, but by design. And we believe every teacher deserves a great learning process, not by chance, but by design. And there, please. It's proprietary. It's proprietary. Their rubric is proprietary. So I don't have access to what it is, but in talking with the folks at TNTP, it's pretty much like every classroom observation instrument that you've ever seen. Exactly. 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 There are things that get in the way of professional learning communities being able to do so. What they are supposed to do is share knowledge, develop new practices, create new knowledge, and joint trial and refinement. What's working, what's not working, how can we continue to revise all of that? But some things that get in the way include things like a lack of clarity and purpose. Why are we together? Because we have late start on Wednesday mornings. Okay, that's not shared purpose, right? That's just, it's in the schedule, right? A lack of sufficient collaboration time and structure to be able to do so. We only get together once a month for about 30 or 45 minutes, and the rest of the time we don't collaborate with one another. By the way, that team meeting is not the only time that a professional learning community exists. It exists in the hallways, it exists in each other's classrooms. And confusion about what's the difference between cooperation and collaboration, right? The most dangerous phrase in the English language is this one. We've always done it this way. This is what professional learning communities have always been like. Shirley Hord, she was the one who developed professional learning communities, said, you got to know the difference between cooperating and collaborating. And she said, famously, dating is like cooperation. Marriage is like collaboration, right? We actually have not just putting our best foot forward, but we're actually engaged in solving some problems along the way. Another major report, an international report, looked at variance in schools. And variance is the difference between the lowest scoring student and the highest scoring student in a school. Variance in the United States is greater within schools than it is across schools. There's more variance between the highest achieving and the lowest achieving student in your school than there are when compared to when you look at your school scores versus another school score. In the United States, the variance is one of the highest in the world at 80%. We've got some kids who are doing really well, and we've got other kids that are not doing really well. And one of the attributions to that is that teachers in the US get relatively little time to be able to collaborate with one another. Now, here's a really interesting study that came out of the UK. Where's the high school people? Where's the middle school and high school people? Okay, this is middle school and high school. And what they found out was that there was a correlation, not a causation, a correlation, a relationship between the amount of time and the frequency that teachers spent in each other's classrooms and student achievement. The more often that teachers were in and out of each other's classrooms, and by the way, not just to say, can I borrow your stapler? But like I'm going to take 10 minutes on my prep period, and I'm going to go hang out in another colleague's classroom, prearranged, of course, not just popping in. There's a correlation between how often teachers are in each other's classrooms and student achievement. By the way, that is not the case with principals. There isn't a correlation around student achievement. There are other correlations. Principals, leaders being in classrooms. They are not related to student achievement. They're related to other factors. But you want to raise student achievement? One of the things to do, make it possible set up a culture, create a culture where people go and they visit each other's classrooms. It's not evaluation. Come into my classroom. Those of you who are seasoned teachers, invite your colleagues into your classroom. Show them, hey, I'm working on this right now. Can you come in my classroom on Tuesday for 10 minutes? Because I'm going to be doing this new thing, and I'd love to be able to get some feedback. I'd love to hear what you're seeing from the back of the room while I'm teaching from the front of the room. Creating that culture can be really important. So that's consistency. Make a couple of notes to yourself. Consistency around content, consistency around use of that content, consistency around collaboration. Is there a first action that you want to add to that? We'll finish up our time together with talking about coherence. Trajectory changing schools do a few things well. They invest in belonging. Belonging among students, belonging among adults, belonging among families. They invest in consistency. Consistency around instruction, consistency around content, consistency around collaboration, and by the way, consistency around the leader's message. Not everything under the sun, like Alexis said, literacy at all times, at all costs, across all subject areas. Man, I can hang on to that. And the last one is around coherence. And coherence has to do with how it is that we make sure that systems that are that are at the school are woven together to be able to strengthen that rope. Mike Fullen talks a lot and writes a lot about coherence in schools. Coherence is about a shared purpose. We understand that we are moving in this particular direction. We're not trying to accomplish everything that we need to accomplish. What TNTP found was that schools that built a unified instructional program and set priorities that were clear to all outperformed other schools. And what this looked like in particular is coherence at the tier 1 level. We've talked a bit about that around instruction and so on. Coherence at the school with leaders creating space for teachers to be able to do the things that they need to do. And coherence at home that caregivers know how to help. That caregivers become as well another important arm of that. From a student standpoint, coherence is really important because you got to devote a lot of brain space to figuring out what it is that your teacher wants. When there is instructional coherence, in other words, like at Alexis's school, we're talking about from one grade level to the next, it makes it possible for students to know predictably what's going to happen. She made reference to those participation cards that they utilize, and they utilize them school-wide. And the kindergartners are shaking these around, even though they can't read all the words on them, and they are the same cards that the sixth graders are using. There is a coherence there to some of those foundational, or we call them signature practices. What are signature practices that you can count on kid at this school, classroom after classroom, grade level after grade level? One of our signature practices is around teacher clarity. You're going to run into this in every single classroom, every single day. It frees up the brain space for them to be able to do that. And when students experience instructional coherence, they are more likely to engage in the difficult work of learning when experiences within classes, among classes, and over time are connected to one another. We open up the ability for them to be able to take that on. Trajectory changing schools, as noted before, they coordinate what quality tier 1 looks like with aligned intervention efforts. Some of you were with me either for the multilingual elementary or multilingual secondary approaches as well. I'm going to use TNTP's findings in this particular case. Here are 4 opportunities to fail for this child, this 5th grader. In his classroom, tier 1, they're reading The Phantom Toll Booth. Then he goes to his intervention block and discusses cause and effect with an interventionist using a leveled text about the water cycle. Then he goes to after school tutoring and he practices fluency by reading 100-word passages and tries to improve his words per minute. And then for homework, he works on a computer adaptive program where he identifies character setting and main ideas of short passages. 4 opportunities to fail. 4 opportunities to not be successful. And when there's incoherence, it's not because people aren't trying. In fact, they're working really hard. They're just not coordinating what their efforts are in particular. So unify them. Unify what those experiences are. What if Ethan has these experiences as a unified effort? He's reading the Phantom Toll Booth in his Tier 1 class. During his intervention block, he previews a passage called The Doldrums that's in the book that they're going to be reading the next day, so that that piece of text can be warmed up for him in advance of instruction. During after-school tutoring, he's improving his fluency by reading aloud passages from the Phantom Toll Booth as well as other related texts that they're working on. And for homework, he's creating picture vocabulary words that are central to the meaning of the text for opportunities to succeed. We can do this at the school where Doug and I are. The intervention team meets with grade level teams for about 20 minutes once a month and essentially says this: what are the kids in 10th grade going to be learning about next month? So that they can line up what some of those intervention materials can be. By the way, most teachers have intervention stuff that goes with their curriculum that are squirreled away in a closet somewhere because they don't use that, but it's actually intervention materials that have been created that align with those same approaches. So when we talk about coherence across the school, it is really in being able to unite what it is that those experiences look like and what it is that it sounds like. I'm going to leave you with 4 questions for you to potentially take back to your team to be able to ask these questions about what's happening at our school. How do we talk about our data? How do we talk about our students? How do we talk to our students? And how do we help our students talk about their learning? Those 4 questions can be really helpful in being able to find where those through lines were around the 4 resources that we know make a huge difference for students around building a sense of belonging, consistency, and coherence across the grade levels. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Your conference presentations tomorrow are going to be fabulous, I know. I'll go ahead and I'll put that URL back up here again. In the meantime, what's your first action that you're going to take on as well? Thank you again for your time and your work and taking care of students. There's the URL again, and we will see you again soon.